Today we are looking at the stages of abstraction and ritualization, which are pretty much the same, or they're kind of parallels of each other. They're very similar, and they often happen at the same time as each other. You could probably break them up into two different things, but they're more or less the same thing. It's kind of just different applications of this same process. And it's kind of a process of symbolism. And we're going to take a look at it now. And I'm using famous brand logos as a way to help explain this concept. Okay, so here you have Netflix, and it slowly abstracts, right? I left out this other Chrome part. There's supposed to be like a three-dimensional, whatever this is, and then it kind of slowly loses that shading and changes a bit. Here's a better example. Starbucks, you have the name and what it is, and then you just have the name half of the mermaid. You don't even have the whole mermaid anymore. And what we're seeing here is we're taking an icon, a logo, and as it's becoming culturally ingrained, you lose the iconography part of it and it becomes a symbol. It no longer needs to say Starbucks coffee because this logo now is a symbol, and a symbol represents concepts and words and language. You look at this and you know it is a coffee shop. That is a symbol. An icon is merely a representation of something. A symbol is sort of its own language pathway. And here again we see this in really explicitly in Instagram, where you start off with a camera, a Polaroid, and then another kind of camera, and then another kind of camera. And then now you just have a couple of boxes and a couple of circles inside of each other. And it's no longer clear that it's a camera unless you have the context of what this symbol is. This is the idea of these stages of abstraction, is that it's trending towards something abstract, and that abstract symbol now represents all of what it used to be and all that we understand it to be. You take a look at this symbol and you know what it means, and you have an identity associated with that. And that's what these examples are representing. Now, the reason why we're doing this is because we're taking a look at mythology and religions around the world. Well, we're taking a look at one specific kind of path of religion. We're going to break down the stages of abstraction with a real world example, because you do have this scale of just brands and stuff and company logos, but you also have much broader religious, cultural examples that take place over thousands of years. And there are many iterations and offshoots, and it's not always necessarily a very clear-cut path. So there's some simplifying of things just for the purposes of this. And we'll get into that in a bit. But we're going to take a look at the first stage here. We're taking a look at mycolatry, or mushroom worship. Here in this first example, or this earliest stage, which you could think of it as the least abstract, we have the sort of Neolithic, shamanic period where this mushroom and this concept of the mushroom has with it its sort of spiritual presence, contains a sort of animistic livelihood to it that ingesting puts you into that state. There's not necessarily a concept of God. It's more like this mushroom is simply this experience, and this experience is kind of beyond words. And we're going to see what happens over time. In order to try to explain this experience has to be personified. You need to turn this abstract concept, and it's kind of almost a paradox. Here you have the first stage is abstract in its beliefs, but it is explicit, it is clear in what it is that it reveres, or it's a good way of putting it. You have the mushroom, there's no concept of invisible powers or forces, yet the experience that mushroom gives you is unexplainable, completely abstract. And don't focus on that part so much, just focus on the actual entity. Because now we have, in sort of these fertility cults and paganism, you can think of Egypt or Greek or Babylonian as some examples. The mushroom is now a mushroom god. It is now a person, or it has a personality. It's personified, it's zoomorphed maybe into a god, and now is its own entity that has characteristics. And part of this is how we just explain the world around us, especially very, very hard to explain phenomena. We use human qualities, we apply human qualities to it because that's what we understand. And then it becomes more abstract the further on it goes. This is the third stage in our real world example of Judaism. Now you've separated the person and the source, God plus mushroom, instead of just mushroom God. See, now you have a separate entity of God. And in this case, it was kind of like a storm deity. At least that's where it sort of originated from. And it's a storm deity because of its relationship to growing mushrooms. A bit off topic for this. The mushroom is now separate. It's now a vessel. It's no longer the source of the experience. It's now a means in which to experience God. Whereas this was all that there was in this first Neolithic or shamanic experience. And then you kind of interact with God, this personable entity. And now it's a messenger, it's an angel, it's a vessel that you can be communicated with by God. So you've started with the mushroom, you've personified that mushroom, and then you've separated the mushroom and the personification into two different beings or entities. And in this fourth stage, we have Christianity. And in Christianity, what happened was now you've personified and deified both the personification and the God entity. So meaning you have God the Father, and then you have his Son, Jesus. And Jesus is that mushroom connection, but only personified once more into where you absorb the qualities and the characteristics of the mushroom, but you're now just a person. You're a God person, right? And often you'll see the colors and the themes. They're pervasive, and they exist through and into the religions, even as they go more and more abstract. You may keep maybe you keep the general shape, maybe you keep the actual mushroom, maybe you just keep the color scheme. And then in this fifth stage of abstraction, and this is interesting, and so this last stage is going to have its own video. But here in this example, the fifth stage of abstraction is in Islam. And Islam, is derived from this same path. But now we have an even more abstract concept of God. It no longer has any personifications. almost no real tangible ties to its original source. So now you have God, or Allah, who is invisible, is characterized so abstractly that it's almost no longer recognizable. It's kind of like this, it's kind of at the same stage of this Instagram logo, where you no longer have any sort of ties to personification or symbology. You simply have the principles and the abstraction of this concept of God. It's going to have its own video exploring the Quran and Islam. This is an extremely important video, this idea of the stages of abstraction, in order to understand how Islam is connected to all of these things. So let's make up a sort of example to help illustrate this, to help understand why we know, or why we're able to say that these broad religious and mythological beliefs are an abstraction of mycolatry. So let's fast forward 1,000 years, and let's say our civilization is destroyed. Archaeologists are exploring remnants of our civilization, and they find this red N, and there's going to be people that don't buy this. They're going to be skeptical of this, but someone's going to say this red N actually represents a movie program. It was a platform in which people could watch films. And the way they're going to deduce this, let's say all they have is these 4 logos. And so they're able to break down this abstraction where, okay, so this N is actually the same N that was used in this previous iteration of this company name called Netflix. And Netflix is actually a code, they're going to say. It's an amalgamation of 2 concepts. Net, as in internet or network, and Flix, which is an alternate spelling of flicks, as in movie flicks. They're synonymous. And then they're going to go and take a look at the next previous symbol or logo, and they're going to say, well, this is the same format that other old films used to use in their titles. You have the shadow, the drop shadow, and then just a bold lettering and a sort of blank background. It's representative, or a cameo, of movies. And then in this earliest logo, you have a clear division between net and flicks, showing that they are in fact 2 different words, shortened and combined to mean one word, to mean this Netflix. And then you also have the symbology related to it, which is a strip of film tape, and where people may say, oh, this is a ladder or a roller coaster or stairs or something. You're able to, through sort of context and studying, well, ancient films used to use tape. It was a reel of photographs, wildly different to what the future uses. And so they're able to prove that this joint concept of using the internet and movies, you have this brand Netflix. And so breaking down this abstraction is what we're doing here with these religions in the context of these mushroom and mycology religions. Seeing the symbolism as it develops, as it becomes more abstract through many different reasons. But that's why we're able to say what we say, that these are mushroom-based religions, even though in practice they no longer have anything to do with these mushrooms. But through the symbolism, through these abstract changes and developments over thousands of years, we can see how the motifs and the iconography and even the beliefs and the practices, how they've evolved. And so now we're going to just take a look at some more images and examples. So here you just have the mushroom. And then you have kind of mushroom people, mushroom personifications. And then you have that division of the mushroom and the person. They're now two separate things. The mushroom and the god have been separated, kind of like the brand name has been left out of this symbol. You now just know what the symbol means. It's the name and the source, an actual entity of Starbucks is no longer in the symbol. They're two separate things now. And then keep going on, we have another mushroom is dropped and replaced by another god, or an incarnation of God. You basically have two gods. And then furthermore, you have an abstract concept of that, where it's no longer even personified. You've dropped the personification. So you went from source to personified source to source is separated from personification, and then the source itself is personified plus the other personification continues, and then you drop the personification altogether and you're just left with abstract God. So those are the stages of abstraction. Hopefully that makes sense, and you're going to see how this happens again through the stages of ritualization. And like I said, they're interrelated, and we're going to take a look at that right now. So in the first stage of ritualization, you have either an unconscious instinct or an intentional action. It can be either one. Let's make up an example. You have a caveman, and this caveman, he's a hunter, and every day before he goes to hunt, he lights a torch on his way out. And this torch he uses as a beacon to find his way back at the end of the night, or at the end of the day, whenever he's finished hunting. And so he can find his way back no matter where he's at. That torch is, in this case, is an intentional action. He's lighting that torch because he needs it to find his way back. Over time, maybe it's weeks, years, it varies depending on many different factors. But this is now a habit. He doesn't even have to really think about lighting the torch. It's like locking your keys on the way out of your house. It's just something you do as part of leaving your house. This hunter leaves his cave, his tribe, and lights the torch. And what happens when this habit is repeated enough, it now is a routine. This routine is now as much a part of his day-to-day work as sharpening his spear or preparing his arrows or putting on his clothes, or it's shaving or putting on makeup. This is your routine. It's part of what you do when you're doing something, if that makes sense. And what happens when this routine is repeated, this could be over the course of many years. This could even be generational. Maybe your son, who's now the hunter, long after the previous hunter is gone, now it's a tradition to light the torch. And so it's not even so much as a beacon of coming home, but a process in setting off. The whole tribe now gathers to light the torch with you. It's something you do that ensures safety. It's familiar, and it's how you set out for the day. It needs to be done, not even so much for its practical purposes as it's now got a more symbolic significance. It's a tradition to light the torch when you leave to go hunting. And then over longer and longer period of time, it's now a ritual. It's been ritualized. In this ritual, maybe there's a mantra or a prayer said. Everyone gathers to light the torch with you before you set off to go hunting, and some words are said, or there's just some level of a process that has to be done a certain way in order for safety to be guaranteed, or the chances of a safe trip increases. And like I said, you have almost this same stage development as the abstraction, where you have this practical, tangible reason, and it's now becoming second nature, and it's something that needs to be done, or what you do without thinking. It's unconscious, and it's kind of blends between your day isn't the same if it's not completed, and there is a actual reason for doing it, to the reason is no longer as important as the sort of concept of doing it, if that makes sense. And then, of course, once you've ritualized it, it may not even be, you may not even need the torch to find your way home. It's just what you do because of this unspoken reason that helps guarantee your safety. What we see in personal lives maybe is you tie your shoe, and you just started unconsciously tying your left shoe first. And then that's just the first time you tied your shoe, you did your left shoe first. And then you just happen to always do your left shoe first because there's no, you have to choose one shoe to do first, and you stick with that. And then now you always only do your left shoe first. It develops further into being, you have to do the left shoe first because you've always done it that way. It's tradition to tie your left shoe first. And then now, once it's ritualized, you can't not tie your left shoe. Otherwise, the whole day is messed up. If you don't tie your left shoe properly, you'll have a bad day at work. You'll just perform worse, or it will feel off. You'll physically feel uncomfortable, right? And you might see this in more competitive fields, like sports, where you have a special pair of socks that you wear, and you won a game when you wore those socks. And so now you just wear those socks every game because they become your good luck socks. And it's part of your routine to put on your socks and to maybe listen to a certain song that you had success with. Maybe you make a prayer, or you have to tap or put on your gear in a certain way. And now years go by and you always have to do it that way. This is just your tradition. It helps get you into that state that you experienced success in. That's really when it becomes tradition, as it's very much like meditation, where you create pathways by getting yourself into a certain trance the same way over and over again. It establishes an easier way to then get in that same deep state as you always do. It's the same thing in sports, or maybe work, or whatever it is you're doing, working out or something, and you have to, or even if you're an artist or you're making a craft, you have to have things set up in a certain way. Maybe you have to have a certain kind of music. Everything has to be in this specific order that you've habituated, that you've turned into a routine, that's become tradition. And then eventually you ritualize it, and it's become almost so abstract that it's less like, it doesn't even matter that there used to be a practical reason for you. Like maybe those socks you wore they have enough compression that it's just more comfortable, and that's why you started wearing those socks. And you did better because you were more comfortable, and maybe it didn't have any reason at all. But you break down in your head long after the game is over everything you did right during that game and everything you did wrong, and you'll think, okay, these socks did right. And maybe going back to that caveman, maybe he has a certain spear that he always uses, or maybe a bear skin that he uses that always gives him comfort, and that familiarity eventually makes way to it becoming a ritual. And once something is ritualized, it's more about this abstract concept of what it represents to you. And you can see these stages of ritualization in the stages of abstraction in any of our examples, whether it's logos or religions. You have them lining up to where these less abstract, more practical process, and then it doesn't necessarily, it's not necessarily it's not devolving, it's not, none of these are bad or wrong. This is just human nature. This is what we do as time goes on. I've talked about this theory of mine, the Entropy Law of Apotheosis. It's very similar to that, where just over time things become more and more abstract the more you do them. And what happens in this case, when you have a ritual that you do over and over again, and you have a group of those, they become a cult. You now have your entire morning routine. You could consider it to be a cult. You have to do things every day a certain way, from what you eat to how you wake up, to what you put on, to what you listen to on the way to school or work or whatever it is. That is your ritual, and all those together is called a cult. And so these stages of abstraction and ritualization, you can see it both on the individual level and on broader societal levels. And in this case right here, what we're talking about is when you have a community performing these groups of rituals or these cults, together they form culture. When you have a group of cults, it forms culture. And now we're able to see why these civilizations, these cultures, why they became cultures, what they had that was shared, and these processes of abstraction. And you could apply this to many, many different things. Obviously, for my channel, we've been focused on mycology and mythology a lot. And so this is just the example I'm using. It's very rooted in Jungian sort of ideology or philosophy. These kind of unconscious trends that become more and more abstract. Oftentimes, there's an anxiety and familiarity to this. But I hope I covered everything that I meant to for this. Yeah, it may be a lot to take in. I don't think it's necessarily overly complex. I think if you really stop and consider logo and brand evolutions and really think about your day-to-day processes, how things become abstract, how it trends toward this sort of superstitious ideology of the concept of what you're doing or why you're doing it. Yeah, I think it's really interesting to break down and to think about. And yeah, I think that is it for the video. Thanks for watching, and peace out.